Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here for our IDEA Awards Spotlight series. Today, we're going to have a great conversation around the series Amend, the Fight for America. My name is Nikki Bardwaj, and I am the Associate Events Manager here at the International Documentary Association. I come to you from Los Angeles on the unceded land of the Tongva and Chumash people who have been stewards of this land for generations. Before we get started, I'd like to give a big thank you to our media sponsor for Variety for helping us bring this conversation to you all today. I'd also like to thank our ASL interpreter, Andrea Lust, for being here with us today. This series is available to the general public, so you can find out our full lineup at our page, documentary.org/awards-spotlight. And with that said, I know you're not all here to see me today, so I'd like to bring up our incredible moderator, Eric Deggans, TV critic at NPR.
Hi. Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for the IDA's virtual panel discussion for the Netflix documentary series Amend, the Fight for America. Given the debate that's going on these days about voting rights, I can't think of a better time for us to have this conversation. So let's just jump right into it and introduce our panelists, executive producer, Jana Babatunde Bey, and executive producer and on-screen commentator, Larry Wilmore. Welcome, guys. Thank you so much for joining us. Before we talk about the series, I got to ask Larry about that picture. What is that picture that comes up when you... It looks like your friend is giving himself a tonsillectomy or something. What is going on there, man?
No, that is homage to my brother. I lost my brother, unfortunately, a few months ago. And that was a picture of us back in the day. He was actually, that was a piece of sweet potato pie that he was like going to tonsillectomy himself with. So it is.
Well, that's an awesome picture. You guys.
It's an homage to my brother from back in the day. I forget that it's there, you know, so it comes up and it does it. Yeah.
I know what you mean, but that's an awesome picture. I love it. So I guess we should start with how the idea for this limited series came together. How did you guys first come up with a concept? And in particular, I'm interested in how you mixed all these different storytelling techniques to create the series that we've seen.
Maybe I'll jump in first. First of all, thank you for moderating this conversation. This project has been a journey. It was truly a collaborative effort. Amongst a whole host of people, all of the people that certainly showed up on screen, but many, many, many more before that. The idea actually was created by Rob Imbriano and Tom Yellen from the documentary group, who I'd worked with previously on other projects, and they came to me and said, we have this idea, we want to do this series about the 14th Amendment, and we think it would be perfect. Perfect fit for your group, a perfect fit for Will. Of course, after hearing the idea, I deeply concurred, and we brought it to Will, and quite frankly, it was one of those things where it was like, really, are we actually going to do a series about a constitutional amendment? Like, is this, you know what I mean? It's heavy. It's a little bit. It's certainly substantive, but also very beautiful and hopefully very lasting. But certainly the content was so rich with the historical information. It almost felt a bit daunting, actually, at the beginning. But when we thought about, well, how could we tell this kind of story with the type of entertainment value that we're accustomed to approaching content with, and still deliver the truth and kind of, the information and certainly the corrective narratives that we weave throughout the series. We thought it would be not only a wonderful challenge, but also an opportunity, to put something actually really good, some of our earlier conversation today, something really good in the world that hopefully would last for generations to come. So along the way, there were many great people that we tapped on to bring their voice into the room. And of course, early on, my buddy over here, Mr. Wilmore. We knew we needed that voice and that fire to really uplift and bring those stories to life. So yeah, so that's how we got started. Maybe Larry, if you want to dive into some of the performative and kind of the reasonings behind that.
Absolutely. Thanks, Shannon. And I also want to thank you, Eric, for hosting this, and People of Variety. And Nikki, thanks so much for your group too. I really appreciate that. Yeah, so that's where it was at the stage when Will and his team, Jan and them, kind of called me in. I remember as soon as, here's the thing with Will Smith, if you say you're interested in something, it doesn't matter where you are, he'll get you to where he is to talk about it. Will doesn't want to talk about it on the phone. He's not sending a text. He's like, no, just come here. Well, I can't. Suddenly there's a plane whisking you away. So that's what happened to me. I was like, yeah, that sounds interesting. Next thing I know, I'm in Miami talking to Will Smith. And we spent about 2 or 3 hours, I think, Janet, just in the conference room. And we're just going back and forth. And I'm trying to pull out of him, well, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? Right. And Will is great about vision. You know, he has so many great ideas. And what he was looking for was a partner that can channel that and produce that into this thing that, as Janet says, can be a real dry history lesson, you know, or the other part of it, Eric, is it can just be a chronology of events, which most documentaries are, you know, and you find the emotions within the chronology, but this is a 6-part series. It's got to be something different. And from the beginning, we're saying, well, how can we take it to different dimensions, you know, and pull different things out of it, everything from music to animation. We thought about animation in the beginning. There was this animation called The History of Japan that I was telling them about. And Will's like, History of Japan, what is that? I'm like, oh, you got to see this thing. And so we looked it up on the computer. He said, that's fantastic. I'm like, we should have like a thing that takes us out of what we think is a documentary and puts us in a different headspace, Eric, because here's the thing. We wanted people to experience this and not just hear it and listen and hear it up here, but kind of experience it in here. And when you get a sense of the contemporary aspect of how things happen, like you can't just tell people about Frederick Douglass' life. You got to smell it, you got to feel it, you got to see what people look like, you know, you got to get the context of the times, and you have to be contemporary now in a sense of reach out in different ways, you know, with music and tone, and not just historians, but how about actors breathing people's words to life so it sounds like they're talking to us now. That was one of the things that we talked about early on, that we weren't sure how we were going to do it. We had so many discussions about it. And sorry to jump a question. Maybe you have a question about this.
No, come on. No.
We had so many, but we had so many discussions about it because remember, Jen, it was when you're beginning something, now that it's done, it looks like, oh, of course you would do it like that. But in the beginning, we weren't sure, you know, or should they be in costume? Should it be a set? What's it gonna look like? Are they gonna be involved with each other? And I was always very concerned from the beginning. I didn't want it to feel like it was, no shade against church, but some church play on Saturday with Malcolm X versus Martin Luther King. You know, those things that we see.
Address all your letters to Larry Wilmore.
I mean, you know what I'm talking about. Where it's
a different show, Eric.
It's the best intentions that they have, but you know, that's not the feel. So that was a big challenge, you know.
But we also knew, I think, just to piggyback on that, we knew we wanted to do something where there was a performance element. We knew we wanted. You know, we were very clear that it had to engage audiences in the way that would entertain and inspire. And we had to bring that universal emotion to the forefront, not just for domestic audiences, but for people around the world. We wanted people to be able to tap into the heart and the nature and the duality of not only the history, but even, you know, and we were, again, this project took some time to create. I mean, it's like 5 years by the time, you know, it was all said and done, and well before all of the things that happened with Black Lives Matter and our recent unrest, even the last year. So we knew that there was such a rich amount of stories. There were so many ups and downs in terms of telling those stories, that if we didn't bring it to life in a way that, as you said, Larry, was well beyond just the chronology of events or, you know, your typical history lesson, that it would all kind of be for naught. That was absolutely a point of clarity for us from the very beginning. And Larry's voice, as you well know, Eric, being able to bring that, you know, a little bit of levity, a little bit of reality, a little bit of dramatization in terms of, you know, taking these kind of very historical moments and bringing them to life so that they were real and digestible. Super important from us from the beginning. Yes, we spent a lot of time talking about that and a lot of time finding the exact structure and framework within which the stories could work, the history could work, and also audiences could be entertained.
Right.
Yeah, so.
So, I want to get back to that because I do have a specific question about that, but I want to pull back a little bit and talk about the idea of the series itself. You know, Black folks, we are used to facing the idea that we might be oppressed or that we might face some kind of prejudice, but I don't think many of us thought that our citizenship was in question. And to have this limited series come along and say, hey, you know, one of the core issues here is whether or not Black people are even citizens, is a new way of looking at all these different things that we know sort of oppressed Black people over the years. And so I wonder, how did you even get to that point of knowing or thinking that an examination of the 14th Amendment could lead us to all these other discussions about Black Lives Matter and lynching and all this other stuff?
Well, part of that discussion, whenever I'm doing a show, Eric, I always try to get the writer and whoever I'm working with to narrow it down to its simplest essence. Give me the one sentence and tell me what it's about, you know? Like when I did the Bernie Mac show, I talk about this a lot. I say, the Bernie Mac show is children are terrorists, I don't negotiate with terrorists. You know? It was very
the elevator pitch, right?
Exactly. Or not even so much a pitch. It's like, what is it? What's in the DNA of every scene? So this is what's in the DNA of Amend. What is a person? You know, who gets to be a person? Not even who gets to be a citizen. Who gets to be a citizen is the logical part of the show, but the heart of this show is who gets to be a person. That's gay marriage, that's immigration, that's women, that's civil rights. It's all in that sentence. Once you have that sentence, who gets to be a person? That supersedes who's this country for, you know, what is this country? Who gets to be a person is the sentence of this series. It's the ball, it's the heart. So once I figured that out in my brain, I'm looking at all of it and saying, does it answer that? You know, if you extract any episode, any part of an episode, is it asking that question? Is it challenging us on who gets to be a person? Because Black people weren't considered people.
That's right.
That's the revelation that people need to have in this. That's what Frederick Douglass realizes, not that he's just not a citizen, he's not considered a person, you know? And so for people to experience that, it hits them like this big ball. Oh, wow, you know, not even a person.
I'm thinking about those clips. I'm thinking about those clips you have of that brother from the 70s. You're interviewing these old white folks who are devoted to the Confederacy, right?
Yes.
And they're talking about Black people like, oh, they're like children, you know, we just have to take care of them. And he's got to sit there.
Sophisticated pet. He said a sophisticated pet.
Yeah, exactly.
Sophisticated pet.
Really?
Exactly. That gets us into the mindset of what we're actually dealing with.
And he felt very progressive in saying that. Right? I mean, if you look at that clip.
And he was honest.
And the brother's sitting there like
very honest. The brother couldn't even be mad. He's like, I mean,
I'm just wondering, like the level of self-control necessary.
Exactly. Necessary to sit there.
Yeah.
It's pretty remarkable. But it is indicative of the mindset and the contextualization that I think, you know, even when we look at all the stories in Amend, we tried really hard to keep a balance because none of these things happen in a vacuum. You know, the people that spoke, even from that clip, it's of the time, right? And to Larry's point, you know, when the 14th came around, there was still a question of who is a person. I mean, to be thought of as a pet for, you know, it it's a mindset I actually can't fathom and really understand, but we tried very hard to provide a truth and a fairness in the presentation of the information, and to also set that environment out to allow for the context to also inform the information. But it is unfortunately a lasting legacy, and in spite of the 14th Amendment and all of the progress that has happened through the push-pulls of democracy and our fights and all the things Larry just named, from civil rights, the women's movement, all of these moments in time, I mean, to present day, we're still struggling. And for us to thread that needle of the historical context all the way through to current day, and to elaborate the fact that this is still a context within which we exist today, in spite of the progress. And yet there is still also this promise and this hope built into the DNA of the Constitution, and built into the DNA of what is the promise of the 14th Amendment. For me personally, that was very inspiring and exciting to be able to weave that narrative together, and to find those stories that would enlighten and in some cases maybe terrify a little bit, terrify and present the truth, but also present the opportunity. Yeah,
and it's very important. And this is one of the things about Will Smith too. Like, Will is not indicting America in this. This is going to sound weird to some people that don't understand, but this is a celebration of America, and to Will's testament too. And this is my phrase because I just made it up in my head, but but sometimes you have to show America the ugly to appreciate America the beautiful.
That's right.
And
Yes.
So we're not showing America the ugly to say America's ugly. No, we're showing you America the ugly to appreciate America the beautiful. The fact that those words, and I did a bit on this in the piece too. It says it's your fault for putting those words in the Constitution. That's on you. If you didn't want people to be equal, if you didn't want Chinese to not be included, you didn't want gays to not get married, that is on you for putting that in the Constitution.
Exactly. Well, what strikes me about this too, and the 1619 Project talks about this too, and is that it's the struggle to get America to live up to the laws that it passed, that the things that it says it's about. And that's one thing that I think Black folks in particular that we've always done, is pushed America to live up to what it says it stands for, and make that a reality, because America will pass laws and then the reality will be very different. And that's what Amend often shows, is that it's one thing to get the law passed. It's one thing to get the 14th Amendment passed and have it official in the Constitution that if you're born in this country, you're a citizen. Now you got to get America to actually act that way.
That's right. And making it clear that, a lot of the beginnings were a Black struggle, but it's not just a Black struggle with this. And that's why one of the toughest ones to produce, but one of the richest ones too, was the women's episode, because that was concurrent with the Black struggle. When you look at the women back in the day during Frederick Douglass' time who were fighting for their rights, and it's a different relationship that they had with it, because especially for white women, it seemed like they had rights, but did they really? It was clear Black women didn't, because they were Black, but, and what is the nature of those rights? What's the relationship, between government and women and men and women, and that triangle, this notion of coverture that women have to be protected. Well, what's the nature of protection? There were so many issues in the women's episode that we're still reckoning with and dealing with even now, that are very interesting and not just easily white and Black. They're a little more complicated and layered and intersectional too.
Right. That and interestingly, the institutions by which these laws are enacted, the justice system as a whole. When we first started this, we weren't necessarily thinking about how the Supreme Court and just how laws are implemented, how they're really utilized as weapons in some way to promote one side or the other. It's almost like the Supreme Court itself became a character in the show. because it was such an instrument of, it was a tool both for good and evil, right? Depending on which side of the fence you were sitting. But it still, from the very beginning of time or America to current day, is that place where this battle is had, right? Between rights and our liberties and freedoms and those who maybe want to withhold them. And particularly, as you were saying, Larry, we start out with slavery because we have to begin there. I mean, just for the time period, but it continues to evolve, and it probably, I think, will, we'll see more of that even present day as our issues, and to your point earlier about voting rights, as these issues continue to be battled out in the justice system. But it's such a unique perspective to really look at how the law is utilized. And in our series, we really thought about, and especially in the women's episode, who our real heroes are.
Mhm.
We definitely have our historical figures, but those lawyers, those legal battles in that courtroom, Pauli Murray is one of them that we pull out in the women's episode. So powerful and so rich and so intelligent and so rooted in the experiences that fundamentally shift, where people actually are able to gain their rights, in the very clever way that the law is utilized, to be able to institute them. So that was a really important part of how we structured each one of the episodes and how we thought about telling the story in a way that really illuminated the pathway, of how these things came to be. So
Yeah.
So in thinking about storytelling, I am thinking about this scene with Mahershala where he performs this.
Which one, Eric? He was so
I know. He was so good. I mean, for the minute he's on camera and he just kind of looks up.
Amazing.
Like, oh man, that's talent. But that scene where he reenacts Frederick Douglass's speech in front of a wide audience, and you guys cut to these archival photos of white people reacting, and he starts out, and then you also have a historian sort of describing what the speech was like, and you use those sort of three different platforms to sort of give us a sense of what it must have felt like to hear that speech. And I'm just wondering, I heard, or maybe I read somewhere that Will helped you guys figure that out, or had an idea that related to that. How'd you come up with that?
Will, what? No, it was
No, I mean,
absolutely.
Will is,
Will.
this part of Will's vision is the experience of this. I'm the storyteller in here, and Will is the experience. It's like, yeah, Larry, that's a good story, but I'm not feeling anything, and I'm like,
kept saying, you got to get
back
into
to the drawing board.
Yeah, and I remember
you have to get into their eyes.
Yeah, and I remember going through that, and Will was like, He goes, we got to go in there. I need to see reactions. I need to see people hearing this speech and feeling this speech and everything. And I was like, you're absolutely right, And I remember him specifically, and this is like our fourth or fifth pass, going through, because we've had many versions of this. And by the way, I want to give a quick shout out to Sasha Stewart, who is
absolutely
our writer of record on here. Sasha did an amazing job. And we had, in one of our early drafts of this, we had our Supreme Court check-in, which is a whole bit that went through the series, that we ended up not doing. But I wanted to just add on to Jana's point where, people, when they think about the justice system, they think about the front part of the justice system, when people get into it, but they rarely think about the back part of it where decisions are made, And what I like about Amend is like that back part of the justice system and how important it is, Plessy versus Ferguson, Brown versus Board of Education. Oh man, so important, so important, and how even the fight over the last couple of years and I made fun of Trump like everybody else and mad at him. But the thing I was most angry about over the last 4 years, and my anger is directed at Mitch McConnell mostly, is the hijacking of the Supreme Court nominees, and hijacked two of Obama's Supreme Court nominees and hijacked one of Biden's. Crazy. That's generational change, Eric. That's generational change. And we're seeing it now in these Texas laws that are restricting women's right to have an abortion. And
Right.
where's that going to go? To a packed Supreme Court, you know?
That's right. It's unfortunate that people don't, for us, I mean, we've talked about this, Larry. We hope that people will see
Yeah.
amend and recognize the power of the Supreme Court, recognize, you said, as you're saying, that kind of back office functionality that is
Yeah.
lasting generations to come. I
Right.
mean, hundreds of years out. I mean, there's some draconian laws that are still there.
Yep.
Now that we're following that are from,
Right.
150 years ago that are completely
Yeah.
just, yeah, it's actually, it's it's so important. And it's one of those things that I think too few people are aware of. And when we're in the middle of these conversations and battles, and particularly with Black people, sometimes we gloss over that operational functionality that is the day-to-day mechanism that helps keep those binds in place.
Mhm.
Perhaps with series like Amend, more will be brought to light and
Yeah.
more education will be out there, so people have a little bit more understanding of the nuance.
Yeah.
That certainly was one of our goals.
We talked about Pauline Murray earlier. It was
Yeah.
Pauline Murray who was really the first one to recognize the importance of the 14th Amendment and how it can be used in these civil rights cases. She's the one that really put that idea in Thurgood Marshall's head,
Right.
This is in the 1940s we're talking about, Eric,
And a woman, by the way.
Exactly, and a queer woman.
Just to double down on that, a woman.
Yep, yep. So I'm sort of going through life, idolizing President Lincoln as the president who freed the slaves. And then I get to Amend, and I find out that he wanted to ship all the free Black people to South America before he signed the Emancipation Proclamation. I blame you for destroying my cherishedness.
What did I say earlier, Eric?
Lincoln.
The ugly of America for America the beautiful, America the ugly. The same thing with Lincoln. Lincoln was a human being, but he was also a great president, because if you're starting there, but you end up there, I'm going to give you credit for that. Right. You don't have to start at the finish, but finish at the finish.
Please. Yes.
Right. And you showed why he changed his mind, because Frederick Douglass stood up.
Frederick Douglass, exactly. And used the same language in his own speech too.
That's right. And to me, that's also indicative of the power of one's voice.
Yes.
Because Douglass, certainly, great orator and all of the things that we know about Douglass to be so tremendous, but even anyone that is willing to raise their voice and to be a part of the conversation has the potential to be an influence. And to your point, Larry, you don't have to start at the finish, but even for Lincoln, and again, back to the context of the time, for him to be in this time and for society to be as it was, and for him to be in this position with all of the confines and variables, and we all know what that is to be in leadership, and for him to have started where he began and then to end up with the Emancipation Proclamation and the transformation of the entire United States, which of course laid the groundwork for everything to come. It's very powerful, one's voice and also the ability to embrace that transformation, which I think is kind of what is what we are saying with Amend. Both the ugly and the beautiful, that it's a complex picture.
I appreciate Lincoln more because of that. Actually.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Me too.
I wonder too if it wasn't some sort of story or allegory about allyship and how that evolves. And you can't necessarily expect somebody who even might want to be effective in the space to automatically come to the struggle knowing exactly what to do and where to apply their power.
That's a very astute point. I'm going to actually jump on that because it's something that Will was really very adamant about in this story, literally from the beginning. He did not want this to be an exclusionary tale, where we get in there and it's, kind of all leaning one way or the other, and it's, or even that it's an all Black thing or an all people of color thing. He was very clear from the beginning that we are this melting pot, and there are certain stories that we have to tell, and we need to maybe correct some wrong storytelling or myths of the past, but it is something that we can all be a part of. It is a conversation, a collective conversation, and very intentionally so. we did our best to stay on track with that throughout the entire series, and to make sure that we invited everyone to the table. That was a very important part of how we developed this, and I hope how the outcome of it presented itself, across the board.
Mm-hmm.
So, one of the things I love about these kinds of series and films, when I looked at 13th, it sort of, it showed how the struggle over that amendment, led to all the things that we're talking about in criminal justice and policing and all of that sort of thing. And now we look at Amend, and you guys connect it to, the mythology around the Lost Cause, and, films like Birth of a Nation and Gone with the Wind, and, ultimately what happened at the Tulsa Race Massacre, and then Jim Crow. And I wonder, as you were sort of pulling on these threads and kind of trying to figure out how you were going to connect anything, what you saw that maybe surprised you the most, or that maybe you hadn't quite realized, or that kind of gave you a new perspective on some of these struggles that we've been talking about?
Honestly, I think for me, I'm surprised at how much people don't know this more than anything else. Like, there are specifics that you find out about it. Like it's easy for all of us not to know all the contributions of an Ida B. Wells or something like that. She's not always taught in history properly. That's fine. But to me, it's a dereliction of duty of our entire educational system that people don't even know that of what the Black journey was in this country. To not even know the simplest part of that, to me, is like, it's one of the things that drew me to this project. It was to tell that story. People think our struggles ended after slavery and don't even think slavery was that bad. It's like, if anything, they were just beginning.
Come on, Larry.
No, he's right. He's right.
No, but listen, and to that point, like you said, a dereliction of our duty. When you think about what you were just mentioning, the Lost Cause narrative, and we talk about that, there's an it's a void, right? There's an absence of information, and unfortunately, the common denominator, particularly in our education system, you get what you get, right? I mean, and if the history isn't in the textbook, or if you're not seeking beyond what you're told, it's hard. You've got to step out a little bit more, be a little bit more open, and certainly, depending on your upbringing, or kind of your cultural background, what neighborhood you grew up in, et cetera, you just may not have that immediate access. You have to step out and actually, seek it out. So, for me, doing a series like this, hopefully that makes that process a little bit easier. And to the surprise of it, even for myself, I was surprised at how much I did not know. And I thought coming into it, I know plenty about this. And certainly, yes, the 14th Amendment, and we'll go do this, but even things like the Chinese massacre that we cover in episode 6, like there's nuances and stories, right? Didn't even realize, I think I might've heard about it somewhere along the way. And now we're seeing these things come up in more contemporary times, even most recent months. It clicked for me about how, yes, we're here in the domestic US, but even the Chinese massacre tied to the current global relationship with China, and how all of these things play out on the world stage. So information, certainly, to be cliche a little bit, but information is certainly power. Knowledge is key. And, hopefully with, entertainment and information kind of coupled together, we can get more people aware, and informed.
Yeah, there's a lot during the Reconstruction period that I think has been glossed over so much, that opened my eyes, that I really didn't know that much about. That I think I learned the most during that period. I'm like, good Lord. I mean, we made so much progress so fast, and it was yanked away, It was, it's really breathtaking what happened.
Like, excellence was a real thing.
Well, there's even a name
during that period. I mean, it still is, don't get me wrong. Let me be clear. Black excellence is still a real thing. But
there's even a name for that. It's called the Redemption. The period where all of the voting rights and political rights that Black people had were taken away from them by the Southern states. And people don't even know that. So it's
people think it's just that pull yourself up from your bootstraps. How come Black people can't work as hard? So you have no idea what this story is. No idea,
Well, and what's interesting to me about that is, I think white people in America especially are encouraged to not focus on moments when America was not heroic, when America was brutal, and when we're oppressed, when people of color or others are oppressed. And I find it even in my personal life sometimes the white people in my life don't understand sometimes the stuff I'm going through unless I sit them down and actually tell them what's going on. And so that's what I think is so valuable about something like Amend, is it's sort of a way of sitting people down and saying, hey, you know, there are some areas of life where you're encouraged to not know this or not pay attention to this or not focus on it. But let's just sit with this for a while and learn a little bit. Does that make sense to either of you?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I think it's to be able to have the discussion. We talked about that a lot in the process of making this, that we wanted it to spark conversation, that we wanted, you know, folks who might think they know to know a little bit more, folks who maybe don't know anything about any of this to you know, experience this and grab the information, but also be, you know, it kind of that it would ignite that conversation and that openness and that hopefully collaborative kind of discussion around how do we take advantage of the promise of America? How do we become a voice for good? And how do we, you know, utilize all of the wonderful tools within our toolkit that is our democracy? How do we do that to improve lives and make society better on the whole? That was a big part of why we undertook this project. And I hope that, you know, at the end of the day, at the very least, young people will be able to see this content and learn a story that's a little bit more full, a little bit more fleshed out and comprehensive maybe than what they're getting just in their traditional textbooks. And for, you know, grown folks to also look at it and maybe fill some of those gaps in their knowledge and use it, you know, for bettering themselves and for bettering others.
Also, there's another notion that's been out there. This is kind of a side point, Eric. So
disclaimer.
Well, what it is there's
well, they can cut this out. You know,
no. He's like, let me just tell you right now.
Well, as Jana knows, clarity is what I'm always striving for. In fact, Jana, remember Will and I got into a real kind of a heated back and forth.
No, don't tell that story, Eric.
No, please tell that story.
I'm not going to tell you that one.
But it was we were both like trying to get what's the clarity in here. That's what we were going. And both Will and I, we don't take things personally when we're engaging like that. But people watching it might think, oh man, you know, they're arguing. But I've, you know, all the years I've known Will, I've always had those kind of discussions. So it was no big deal. We're both trying to find it. But to me, a point of clarity that I think is important for Americans, especially white Americans, is just because we're showing you history doesn't mean that it's an indictment. You know, sometimes it's just information, it's a lesson, you know, but you don't have to feel indicted necessarily to know something, because anytime you're feeling indicted, it's this, you know, and people resist and they don't want to hear it, and it's all these things. But until you allow information to seep through and come in, you can't move forward on it. Recently, in the New York Times, Tom Hanks just wrote an op-ed about how he didn't know there was this Tulsa massacre and about the things he didn't learn. And it's so fascinating, you know, to hear from someone like that and the way in which he wrote that, you know, as this information is finally seeping in there. And I think people can get an understanding of what these fights are. The chief one right now, like the fight with Black people and the police, a lot of people look at it as a white and Black struggle. It's not. It's a Black-blue struggle. It's about power and powerless, you know, and power being enforced on powerless, whether it's communities of color that don't have a lot of money and they're being preyed upon, like, you know, dinging them through tickets all the time, or it's some of these other things. They all go in that same bucket, you know, of our relationship with power, and power being right next to us and people being able to enforce it without, you know, ramifications. That's why you can have Black cops doing these too. People don't understand that, you know. So
yeah, it's systemic. It's systemic.
That's
Here
right.
here in Florida.
that was my side point. Sorry.
Oh, no, that's great. No, here in
Wasn't
Florida,
too
you
much
know, the
inside.
sheriffs were a longtime enforcers who tried to drive down Black people registering to vote in the 50s and
Right.
and help the Ku Klux Klan avoid culpability for any sort of terrorism that they might commit. So there's a long-standing history. In the same way that you show a long-standing history in the 14th Amendment, there's a long-standing history there too that people should be aware of.
Mhm.
It's interesting to me. I've done a few of these documentary shoots where you get the sense that the director is like telling you what he or she wants you to say so they can fit it into this narrative that they've already decided. But from what I've heard about Amend, you guys let the experts sort of tell you where to go in the narrative sometimes. So particularly for people who may be watching this who are also trying to do similar work, can you talk a little bit about how you use the experts and how they helped you figure out where to go in the story?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, to make a distinction between, like you brought up 13, like 13 had a destination. They had formed an opinion about where we are right now and was using 13 to explain that relationship. 14, this is different than what Amend is. We're showing you the journey of this thing and how it's been used in these areas and other thing. And we're so lucky because there's so many brilliant scholars out there. And
Yes.
and we don't have to make anything up, you know.
We had a plethora of information, an
Yes.
abundance of
I mean,
riches.
your experts were so good though, man. I mean, like I said, the way that guy described the Frederick Douglass speech was just was perfect.
Because he loves it, you know.
Right.
Eric Foner and some of those people, they love talking about that. They love history. They have an appreciation for it, and they love telling people these things that you may not know, you know.
We actually chose those experts in particular, in part because not their love, but their love translated into a real storytelling acumen to bring that history to life. And to your question of how did we kind of find the story? I mean, there was so much information that they just gave so much. I mean, hours worth of stories. True experts in their fields, but hours worth of stories and history and very emotional. There was a very emotional connection to the history that they shared and how they shared it. And, you know, many of them scholars and, you know, to your point, you know, Martha Jones, you know, they're crying and, you know, it's deeply personal for them that what they shared with us was well beyond just the historical information and the data, so to speak. And we were thoughtful about who might be the right fit to participate in this show, specifically with that in mind. And they certainly they were extraordinary. To your point, you know, Brian Stevenson and David Blight, as you said, Eric Foner, Vanita. I mean, the list is long.
Sherilyn Ifill, Brittany.
Oh my gosh, Sherilyn Ifill, come on. Yeah. She was just tremendous. So we wanted storytellers. In fact, we didn't call them experts. I think we finally acquiesced that the experts was a appropriate title, but we started with storytellers. That we very specifically chose storytellers.
And it's for me, it's great to have them sitting down, you know, as the institution telling us these stories, and then to have the actors standing up, you know, in a different kind of space, you know, breathing that same information. So they're breathing with the life in it, and they're giving us the experts take on it. It's interesting to have that dynamic, you know.
And you got a lot of great performers to participate in this too, not just Mahershala, but Lena Waithe and Joseph Gordon-Levitt and Pedro Pascal, and you know, a lot of great people. I imagine with Will Smith involved, you didn't have to work too hard to get people to take part, but what was that process like, figuring out who you wanted to invite and getting them involved?
Larry just opened up his Rolodex. Don't even do it, Larry. Tell the truth.
We joke about that. It is shocking how many people I've worked with when they come in. I go, "Hey, how's it going?" Things like that. It's funny that Will, of course, is the magic door that opens and people want to take a look and peek what's inside. But when people peeked what's inside and saw what we were doing, they were like, absolutely.
I'm
So
in for
it was a
sure.
combination of those two. And we didn't have to nudge much once they showed that interest. And it was just great. We were kind of, because of our schedule was real tough and we had to call a lot of people at the last minute. A lot of people said they do it and we're in like the next day, you know, and that sort of thing. So,
Wow.
you know, thank
Yeah.
God that they said yes, so many special people in it too, you know.
Yeah, the folks that showed up wanted to be there.
Yeah, it did.
You know, it certainly will open the door, and you know, there was a lot of love and respect that just kind of was infused throughout the production of this. But particularly the actors that showed up, they were there because they wanted to be a part of this conversation.
Yep.
And appreciated actually the opportunity, the feedback we got. They appreciated the opportunity to be a part of this storytelling, and even to learn more about the history, and to just be a part of something that I think everybody kind of looked at as a part of a legacy, and something positive to contribute, both in terms of the art and the history.
Yeah, and just talking with some of them about it, I remember just standing there, Gabriel Luna, you know, and his whole face just lit up when we're just talking about the material, you know. And so it's a different experience that you usually have with actors. I love actors to death, but you know, the sets are just, it's just a different thing. There's kind of a hierarchy sometimes and that kind of thing, but nothing against them. That's the way it goes. Not like this, you know. I mean, all of them were like that. They were all, nobody was tripping. It was just a, hey man, is that okay? Is that what you want? You know, what else can I do? Thank you so much for bringing me in. Like, there was that reverence that everybody had coming in. It was awesome. It was really great.
And you know, we had that too, even with the crew. I just want to point that out because you know, Kenny Leon and even Ronaldo Marcus Green that came in and did our second part. I mean, from the directors on down through every member of the crew, above the line, below the line, we just had a really great energy, which, you know, personally I deeply appreciated. And to your point, Larry, there were none of those shenanigans that tend to happen on sets.
No.
It was really about, you know, it was really about a higher purpose. And I think everyone kind of came in with that expectation and with that delivery. It was a beautiful experience in that way. But yes, it was a crazy Rolodex.
It was.
And I mean, the list is really long. You didn't mention Yara Shahidi, or Asante Black. I mean, we had young people, old people, you know, and again, a diverse group.
Myra Wiley, Myra Wiley. Oh,
Samira Wiley was great.
So many people.
Helen Hunt, Diane Lane.
Yeah, Helen Hunt killed it. Yeah, I mean, and it was like, oh my gosh, we were so.
And there were people who wanted to do it, but the schedule didn't allow. We wanted to have them come in. There were people.
That's true too.
There were like, you know.
It was challenging in that way. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've got like about 10,000 more questions I could ask, but we are unfortunately at the end of our time here. I did want to end on something that would also be appropriate for the IDA audience. And so we had talked, you know, before we started recording about, you know, making things excellent and trying to do the best that you can do. So if you could just quickly give a sense of, you know, what you would tell filmmakers that are trying to do this kind of work about how to make it excellent, about how to make it impactful, something that they could take from this panel discussion and use in their own work.
First, Larry?
Sure, I'll go first. I was very fortunate, Eric, a couple of years ago to be asked to be on the documentary film panel at Sundance. I'd never been to Sundance, and I've always loved documentaries, but to be able to hang out with people in the documentary field and to sit there in the audience and watch it, man, my love for it, my love and humility both rushed in. And humility is a good word because the passion that these people had for their films and everything too, and how hard it is to tell some of those stories. There's so many different types of documentaries. I don't have to tell the people watching this, but as you know, and many of them, you don't know what the story is until you're done, you know, and it's different from the way that I work. You got to know what the story is going in. Sometimes in documentary, what you're shooting is going to tell you what the story is when you're done, you know? And so I would say always be chipping away, and you never feel like you have to, like if you're unsatisfied with something, that it has to be that. Nope, you can keep chipping away. We did so many re-edits and re-edits and re-edits and talked about the story and redid it. The final version you're seeing is not where we started, you know. We after everything was shot, we did it many times. I remember I went through all the episodes with the great people at MakeMake who came in late in the game and were fantastic. And I went through every episode. I said, guys, we got to change this. People are like, what? I'm like, nope. And I said, here's what I think the story is. And I went through every episode, and we took each episode a day. And I said, I think this is what the story is. And we just went scene by scene, frame by frame. And they were like, cool, let's do that, you know? And the women's episode, we had to do that 3 times because Will came in and said, nope, that's not it.
Now you're telling come on, Larry.
All the secrets. But what I'm telling you these things to say, when you shoot it and you got it and you're like, you don't have to be finished. Keep chipping away, you know, keep making that thing until you go, that's it. That's the thing, you know.
That's right. Stay the course.
Stay the course.
Yeah, I think that's an important part. It's certainly, I think, a lesson that we took away from Making Amend. You know, you have these lofty goals and ideals going into it, and perhaps you know the story you want to tell, but the information also is the guide, right? I mean, particularly in docu, where, you know, you like you said, you don't always know necessarily, but you have that guiding question and you're seeking the truth, but it's not always, well, as we all know, it's sometimes a messy truth, and sometimes it's a very harrowing, difficult, arduous process. But the end definitely justifies, you know, the toil and the struggle as you said, to keep chipping away, that diligence and that commitment to really getting it right, whatever right is, you know, for you as a storyteller or for the project that you're doing. I believe that we, to the point of revisiting stories and cuts, I think we stay true to that. It was the North Pole for all of us as producers, and actually I think we almost felt it as a duty to the material and a duty to everyone who showed up and participated, and to Netflix and to the audience and to the world, really, without being too Pollyanna about it, but really to get it right, and to do so with an unwavering commitment to really just being our best and doing, you know, as close to excellent as we possibly could. So.
And I'll say this last thing, Eric, as a thank you. As a thank you to Netflix. And here's what I'll tell filmmakers out there: when you have a partner like Netflix, it may be somebody else, but I'll use Netflix as an example. They shared our desire.
Journey, yes.
They shared our desire to have it at that level. I'm emotional right now because it's rare you get to have a partner like that, you know, in this business, where they're like, yeah, we want you to do that too. Just go for it. Just do what you got to do.
100%.
That kind of freedom. I mean, come on.
That was a blessing to have that support, and certainly very necessary. Necessary.
It was awesome.
Well, thanks so much for sharing all of those experiences with us, guys. We really appreciate it. Executive producer Jana Babatunde Bay, and executive producer and on-screen commentator Larry Wilmore from Amend: The Fight for America. Thanks so much for joining us on this IDA virtual panel discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm.